I'm Rick Dior, and welcome to part 4 of our Soloing over Vamps and Figures series. So this is the most complex piece that we've done so far. This particular thing is from a Steve Smith record called Players. It's pretty old. It's when I was a youngster. And this, I believe, is from a live record. It's out of print, but I did do a transcription of it. That was not the transcription that I played. That was just me soloing over the figures. But I'll put the figures up on the screen so you can see them now. This is a very, very difficult solo. It's actually 35 bars, and it's not predictable at all. So it's got lots of syncopation, and nothing is where you think it should be. So the most important thing when you're doing something like this, especially the first time, is to count like crazy. All right, and these kinds of things are rare that you have to play something this complex. But I've had to do stuff like this where it's a long form kind of repetitive solo. So up until now, we've done some shorter, 8 and 16 bar kind of repetitive figures. This is much longer. It's twice as long as those. And a few figures repeat themselves, but they're in different spots. So the way I like to approach this at first is simple. Okay, so what you need to do is be able to count, like I said before, and catch these figures in a simple way. Now you noticed when you just saw me play this solo that I left a lot of space, sometimes in front of the kicks, which is really an effective tool when you're soloing. It's kind of a surprise, and you're creating a lot of tension by doing that. It's almost like it's a high wire act, and the audience doesn't know really what's going on, and it's just a fascinating thing to watch. All right, Chick Corea does this kind of stuff as well with his tunes where he writes complex vamps that drummers have to play over and catch the figures. So what we're going to do is we're going to play this simply first over some 16th notes for you at the tempo of 120, which is a lot slower than the original tempo. And I want you to count along with it. I'll be counting too. And we're going to start from the 5th bar of line 1, and I'll count it off. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see there I'm playing 16th notes on my snare and then doubling the kicks with snare accents and the bass drum. That's the best way to start out doing this kind of thing. You can do it slower, obviously, and if you need to slow it down, you can do that on YouTube right here with the slow down speed change if you go into the settings, the audio settings. Okay, so once you have that, you want to do that a lot. Get it in your head. If possible, memorize it. And, so this is a hard one to memorize because, again, it's a long form. Now, like I said in the last version, the last video of this series, you do not need to catch every single thing on a cymbal or a hi-hat. So sometimes I'm just catching it on my bass drum, the kick, or the toms. And again, trying to leave some space so I'm not playing through everything. Now, if this went on a little longer, I would have gotten even more intense in that. You can do that each time. Again, we talked about that in the last video. So this kind of thing, like I said, is a little bit rare that you have to play something this complex, but it's important. Now, as far as catching the figures, there's a few things that you can do that are normal, and you hear lots of drummers doing. So let's talk about those. The first one is filling in those spaces right before the kick, and that's what we're going to call the figure, a kick, with the bass drum. And then catching the kick or the figure with your snare drum and a cymbal or a hi-hat. So in other words, the first bar that has kicks, bar 5, could be like this. So you see there, I'm playing my bass drum right before that 8th note. So if you're playing a fill, so you're playing a fill and then using your bass drum as kind of an anchor, you're landing on that and then playing the figure. Okay? So that's something that you can practice pretty easily by just playing around the drums, and before you play that hit, you anticipate everything with the bass drum. And if you go back and listen again to the beginning solo, you see I did that quite a bit with my bass drum. Now when you have figures like line 3, measure 4, which is this, you could do this. So there I'm catching all those figures with, again, my hands, you know, my left hand on the snare drum, my right hand on the hi-hat, and the bass drum is anticipating those. You can go, you can add a diddle, all those things. So once again, you don't always need to catch a figure with a cymbal and a bass drum together. You don't need to do that. A snare drum's fine. Even sometimes just a cymbal by itself is okay to do that too, just to break up the monotony of it. All right, so the most difficult figure in this one is from line 4, the 3 last measures of that. I'll play that slowly for you. 1, 2, 3, 4. So a good way to catch that would be this. So you see there I'm setting it up with my snare drum and my bass drum together and quantizing, in other words, playing those notes as evenly as possible. And that's called a setup. That's what helps the band. So quicker, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, you see that there. Now, a few times you could use these figures as motivic material. So in other words, it gives you a figure and you could keep going with that figure. Again, if you go back and watch the solo, in the beginning you saw me do that several times, where I heard a figure which might be ba, 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 and I sort of echo it on the drums right after that. And sometimes I precede a figure like that as well. So that's a very musical way of playing, you know, and you could use your toms as melodic devices. Go forward and backwards, which is called retrograde. So those are soloing devices that you can use melodically if you have some tuned toms and a bass drum. And then the last thing you can do is take some of these figures and fill them in with the toms. So there's a couple times that this figure happens. And it's pretty obvious on line 6, the last bar, you have 1. And when you have that, you could fill in like this, 1. So I'm taking that figure and I'm filling in notes with the toms. Now the last thing I want to talk about is playing some odd rhythms. In other words, some polyrhythms, some odd groupings. And I did that a few times, and those are best left for big spaces. So this solo has a few of those. Line 2, the second bar, you have about 5 beats to play in there. Of course, line 5, you got a whole bar rest where you can play something like that. But try to save it for wide open spaces. I played a couple 7s in that first solo there, and some 5s, and different kinds of groupings. And again, if you keep your hi-hat going, that will really, really help the band. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and this will end this series, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.